Welcome back into the Lions247 Podcast. I am Tyler Donohue. He is Sean Fitz. We're here in Happy Valley where the university is on the verge of spring break, and then they come back, and we got spring ball on our hands just around the corner. Winter workouts wrapping up on Thursday, going back to something we haven't seen since early 2020. They're going to open their doors, let some media in for this final winter workout session, a chance to evaluate some guys face to face, get as many pictures as you possibly can. We'll have a bunch of coverage up on Lions247.com with some takeaways. Sean, you already put a piece up on Thursday, some specific players you'll be watching closely when the weight room doors open. It's a long list, and this is a good opportunity because it's one we haven't had for a couple of years.
Yeah, it started out as a short list, and then I'm like, what about this guy? What about this guy? And then there's that guy, and then there's this guy's backup. And yeah, it expanded a little bit beyond what I thought I was going to get into, but there's still some quality names on that list. I talked to some folks in the program earlier today about who should be taking a look at. And of course, a lot of the regulars, the early enrollees are always very interesting at this point in time. I mean, Zane Durant's been a guy that we've heard from everybody over the last couple of weeks. And a guy like JB Nelson, the offensive lineman out of Lackawanna, where does he fit into the thing? But I mean, there's some older guys too that you can, sort of get a feel for what you're looking for in leadership and the vocal ability. We talk about a Curtis Jacobs in that manner, a guy that's, I think we said it before, really has an opportunity to make a leap here this offseason to become a star. So, I think there's a bunch of guys to watch today. Hopefully nothing breaking comes out of it because we're recording here on a Thursday afternoon. Then we'll head over to Lash in a little bit and check things out. But it'll be good to see. I mean, this is first time since either late February or early March 2020. I remember, checking things out there. We didn't get it last year or last two. I guess it's been 2 years since we've been in there. So it's always fun to see the team building, the camaraderie, and of course the strength program under new director Chuck Losey. That'll be an interesting one because this was always one of the most enlightening conversations that we had with any member of the Penn State staff when Dwight Gall would come out and somehow just rattle off numbers and all these different formulas and strength indexes and everything like that about how these guys were doing in the offseason. It's just a marvel to watch. We'll see what Chuck brings to the table outside of the mustache, which of course he is famous for. So looking forward to all that. Check out Lions247.com for all the coverage today. Mark and I will be up there. Grace Brennan will be up there as well. So don't forget to check that out after you listen to this podcast.
So Penn State, obviously, this is an opportunity to kind of showcase the advancement. It's always interesting to see, Sean, year one to year two guys, particularly since we didn't get a ton of eyeballs on a lot of those true freshmen last year. And I go back to some of these names that you have listed here, and the ones that aren't listed are also the interesting ones. The guys that have been out of sight, out of mind: Salim Wormley, PJ Mustipher, Adiza Isaac, Hakeem Beeman. This is the point of the calendar where you kind of get a glimpse at where guys may be heading into spring ball. Availability is in question for plenty of these guys, and we're also forecasting towards being available for padded practices in August, and that's the important part. But it's an unfortunate part of football. You may see some guys walking around a little hobbled that we didn't know were nicked up. Those are the kind of things that also tend to get gleaned from this encounter.
Well, we haven't had an opportunity to overreact to anything in the last month or so since the Outback Bowl or the Outback Bowl practices. So this is always an opportunity because it's never the full team, and it's never just like a certain segment of players, like it's just the early enrollee, whatever. It's always just so random of who's there, who's not. And of course, class is going on here right now, just leading up to spring break. So I'm sure there will be things to overreact about. I'm sure there will be videos in which guys are just beasting out and doing all these kind of crazy things. It's always fun to get an overreaction in between the bowl game and the spring game, because that's always something we need to keep ourselves, sort of light and fit.
This is the first of a few days to know here in March with some media access that will certainly help our coverage at Lions247 and give us some things to talk about here on the podcast. Got the open workout on Thursday, a little bit later in the month after spring break. Monday, the 21st, James Franklin in-person press conference. the first time in a long time we've had one of those on campus scheduled to open up spring ball on the 21st, which is going to be 15 practices going to April 23rd and then that blue-white game. And then April 24th, or March 24th, I should say, pro day back at Penn State as well. So another chance for a lot of these guys who were at the combine, those who were not invited to the combine, to show what they can do in front of some pro scouts. That's all coming up. But before we look ahead and kind of move beyond winter workouts, just kind of putting a bow on this, it's an early proving ground for the freshmen, as we've documented, but I think really just as important for this team where it's at right now from a roster standpoint, even some of the coaching leadership that they've lost. Who's emerging as vocal presence? Who's emerging as the accountability leaders that maybe weren't doing it this time last year? That's always a very important part, I think, of when you're going through winter workouts into spring ball, because you can't wait until August to really step up and be that kind of a guy. Sometimes you can, but it's much harder to do at that stage of the calendar.
Yeah, and it's not always the obvious guys. I mean, I just talked about Jacobs, with the potential to be very good this year. But, you looking back, Jesse Luketa had a fantastic year last year, but the leadership has always been there for him. You look back to a guy like Mark Allen in a couple of years ago, a backup running back who was kind of the heartbeat of one of those teams. So, I mean, it's not always the first place you look, because the first place you're looking is, used to be Parsons, used to be Owe, used to be all these stars. But there's glue guys in there that I think we'll try and discover and figure out, because you look at the way that this team played over the last half of the 2021 season, and you were sort of searching for these guys to come out of the woodwork and establish themselves as leaders. And sometimes it happened, sometimes it didn't. Of course, when you lose 5 of your last 6 or 5 of your last 7 games, that's all the negatives are going to pop up. So we'll be looking for that. I think there's some I don't even want to call them seniors. Well, of course, you can't call them seniors anymore because it's, with the COVID year, some of them might be seniors, some of them might be sophomores still. So you'll find those veterans in there that people are sort of gravitating to, clinging to. And it's going to be, for Chuck Losey and his staff, it's going to be those guys that they lean on the most for, sort of being that liaison between the strength staff and the players.
We talked a lot about the freshmen, the early enrollees, trying to make their initial impression, their opening case for consideration to burn redshirt status, to play big roles, whether it's a Nick Singleton or a Zane Duran or even a Bo Prabula, Drew Aller. We've talked about a lot of them this year. But one thing that is a more difficult conversation to wrap your head around, but it's an unfortunate reality of college football, is last case kind of situations that are spread across the roster. We don't really want to single out a bunch of guys here, but you're at the point now where you've had that wave of transfer portal entrances after the regular season, and we know one is upcoming after spring ball. That's going to be for Penn State. That's going to be for programs across the country. Chris Hummer joined us a couple weeks ago and forecasted that it's going to happen here. There's going to be movement. And so these 15 practices that are upcoming and really this winter workout stretch, it's a point where if you're a year 4, year 5, and maybe in some cases even a year 3 guy, you've got to get on footing with your assistant coaches and figure out where exactly you fit. And is this the right move for you moving beyond spring?
Yeah, we'd love everybody to succeed and live up to the expectations that they all had when they came in, but it's just the fact of the matter is that doesn't happen. So you've got veterans that will get passed up. You've got guys that maybe have played a bunch of football before that get caught up in rotational differences and things like that. So I think a lot of that is behind Penn State in terms of what they, have seen gone to the portal. But still, as you mentioned it before, you're not going to escape the spring semester unscathed. There are going to be guys that are just looking for a better opportunity or just looking for an opportunity. Because I think it's really fascinating to see how you can, some programs have been bringing back those 6-year guys and those 5th-year guys, and I don't want to say they don't add value, because the experience is certainly something worth leaning on, but they're not going to provide you with reps. They're not going to provide you with, a lot of meaningful game activity, which can end up being counterproductive when you talk about getting those young guys reps.
And of course, you still have to wonder, how does that pandemic year, which absolved everybody of a year of eligibility, how does that factor into decision-making? Are guys going to maybe be a little more patient with the process because that clock, the eligibility clock, isn't ticking quite as loud as it normally would be if eligibility was used in 2020. Some things to factor in there. As James Franklin has said repeatedly, this is a different phase, a different era for college football when you're trying to manage a roster. that's part of the process. Again, check out Lions247.com heading out of this Thursday open session for photos, video, and content as we get our latest look at the Nittany Lions. Sean, we're going to get a chance to see a bunch of familiar faces in action in Indianapolis in the next few days, starting on Thursday with Jahan Dotson. The wide receivers, tight ends, and quarterbacks are out there at the scouting combine, going through positional drills, going through their testing. We heard from Jesse Luketa on Monday. We hope you heard that episode. A former Penn State linebacker, defensive end, who's getting ready to try to build his draft stock. So are 7 other guys. So I'll go through the list real quick, and then we'll just pinpoint some things that maybe stand out to you and I. Jahan Dotson, Arnold Ebiketie, Jaquan Brisker, Jesse Luketa, Brandon Smith, Rasheed Walker, Tariq Castro-Fields, and Jordan Stout representing Penn State out there. No Big Ten program sends more representation out to Indianapolis this year than Penn State.
Yeah, it's going to be a big week for those guys. It's already started. Dotson had interviews. He will run later today. I believe DraftKings has him at 4.33 for the over-under, which there's not a ton of those guys out there, but that's what he ran last winter at Penn State. So it'll be really interesting to see. Penn State's times are usually very close to combine times. I will say 4.33 would be elite. It'd be an amazing run for him. So be interesting to see which side of the coin he falls on there. But Dotson has an opportunity to solidify his standing. Maybe as a late first rounder, potentially an early second rounder. The tape is phenomenal. So, I mean, you're just going to go back to that over and over again, a little bit lighter than you'd like, but we've seen light receivers succeed. We've seen light receivers excel in the NFL as well. So Dotson has an opportunity to solidify his draft standing, as do the other guys at the top of the board in AK and Jaquan Brisker. Those guys, you know, I expect them to test well. I expect all Penn State guys to test well, to be honest with you. That's kind of where we found ourselves in the last couple of years. It's just looking and taking for granted that these guys are going to go out to the combine and run really well. I mean, even a guy like Jordan Stout's going to run well. I mean, that's kind of where they're at with this whole production thing. So I think you go back to AK and Brisker, those guys, positional drills will be big. Finding a position for Ebiketie will be big as well. But those guys have tape to back it up, and they've been phenomenal at times. Some of the top players in the Big Ten, those first 3 guys, and it's a really big opportunity for them to, I think, in Brisker and AK's sense, even move up a little bit more.
Sean, you may have noticed there's a lot of opinions about where players will be picked in the upcoming draft, and it's all over the internet. But why don't we go right to Mel Kiper, because he's been doing it for a long time. We always talk about him. He's got right now Ebiketie and Jahan Dotson in his latest first-round mock draft that came out this week before the combine. The combine is going to change everything and shake up the board, but just kind of an indication there. I went over to Pro Football Focus, kind of saw what their big board looks like. They've got 3 Penn State players in the top 50, and Jahan Dotson, Jaquan Brisker, and then Arnold Ebiketie, all of them between 38 and I think it was 50. So again, I think I mentioned this before. We could see Penn State back-to-back years get multiple players in the first round, something that they hadn't done for an 18-year span. Or we're in a situation where when you wake up on a Friday and you kind of see, okay, what's the situation look like for day 2 of the draft? You may see 3 Penn State guys on the top 10 big board for round number 2. This is a proving ground here in the next 2 weeks. You've got Pro Day coming up later in the month. But we've also got to note with Dotson specifically, and it's happening every year now because we're seeing just check out the recruiting classes. Wide receiver is where so many standout athletes are just directing their focus right now. It's a deep recruiting class, and Jahan Dotson may be your first round talent, but will there be enough first round slots to fit in all these receivers and work his way in there? If he goes on the under on the 4.33, that probably answers the question.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a big opportunity for him. Everybody knows he's fast. I think, looking at his career, and you go back to the Minnesota game, it's unfortunate that it went that way, because he kind of got that label of guy that couldn't run away from people. And then, he started running away from people and doing a heck of a job over the next couple of years. So it's been funny to follow him, because he ran that 4.73, I think it was, when he was in high school. At one of those camps. And that really, that knocked Ohio State off him, knocked Michigan off him, knocked Penn State off of him for a while. You couple that with the 24-foot long jump, and eventually he ran, I think, at 10.8 something in the 100. So those track times backed up his athleticism and that long speed. And people were questioning, and myself included, were questioning what kind of athlete, not so much that he wasn't an athlete, but what's the discrepancy here? How can it be this crazy? comes out, runs a 4.33 last offseason. I think he's going to do well. I don't know that he's going to break that mark or equal that mark in Indy because it's a little bit different in terms of the timing structure. You got one laser and trying to beat that laser is tough. So, but he's got an opportunity to do so. He's got an opportunity to solidify himself. I was, reading the NFL.com, the NFL.com evaluations. They actually have Brisker as the highest scored, Penn State prospect. And then you've got AK, and then you've got Dotson, which of course they're going to knock Dotson for his size and things like that. But I thought that was really interesting is that you've got these three guys at the top, and everybody agrees that they're three guys in the top. But are there a couple first rounders in there? I don't know. Are they top of the second round board guys? I don't know. And what order do you put them in? I can make an argument for all three of those guys being the top one.
No, it's a fascinating thing to follow and what determines what franchises do, especially at the back end of the first round. It's always a wild card. You're getting into teams that can maybe afford some luxury picks. Then you talk about guys,
that's a sweet spot right there.
Yeah. And then jumping up into the late first to get quarterbacks and this and that. So we'll see how it shakes out. I believe in Kuiper's draft, he had both Ebiketie and Dotson going in the mid-20s range. He had Dotson as the fifth receiver off the board, I believe. So again, receivers, a heavy top-loaded group. I'm going to go to Brandon Smith real quick here, Sean, because I don't think there is a player who is more polarizing right now when you kind of look at what that the word around him. I go to Pro Football Focus, and he's number 62, which puts him in late second round range. And then you go to NFL.com, and I use these two for examples. And NFL.com has him as a borderline draft pick, maybe an undrafted free agent. And expecting him to put up really impressive athletic numbers this week, I'm very curious we're not going to hear about it, but I'm very curious how Brandon Smith handles himself in pressure cooker spots, talking to league executives, talking to NFL decision makers. When they come at him a bit about his shortcomings on the field, why didn't he look like a complete prospect coming out of Penn State? They're going to know he was the top linebacker in the country going into Penn State. He's the only guy who made that leap after year 3 from the Nittany Lions. I know a lot of folks, myself included, felt like a year of refinement maybe bumps up his draft stock. He went for it. He's investing in himself with this decision. But, man, it could go one of two ways. I think either he wows some people and he ends up, convincing somebody that it's worth going day 2 on him and maybe even round 2 on him because of that athletic pedigree, because they can reach that potential. And they're thinking about when he's 23, 24, 25, what can they make him coming up on that second contract? Or maybe he falls and falls and falls. And this is one of those cautionary tales. You don't want to see that play out for a young man, but it's really just kind of playing out that way. And maybe we'll get some clarity through Indianapolis. But when I was reading up on Brandon Smith this week, there is a lot of varying opinions, and many of them are skewed toward the tail end of the draft.
Yeah, polarizing, as you said. But I mean, when a guy leaves early and you question his decision, might be because of size, might be because of athleticism. He checks those boxes. So I feel like somebody's going to want to take that chance, feel that they can fix him. And if they can't fix him, make him an edge rusher, make him a 3-4 outside linebacker, something like that, because he's got that length. He's got that explosion off the edge. He did show at times that he could blitz. But yeah, you're right. I think it's going to be interesting to watch because he's going, they've already watched the tape. They've already got their baseline evaluation on him. He'll come out. I think he'll test well. And that's going to force people to go back into the tape and try and figure out where the holes are and what does that make him? Does that make him a late day 2 pick, or does that make him a guy that you're sitting there and late in the draft and taking a flyer on? So I do think he'll get drafted. I mean, I think there's just too much athleticism. There's too much size and ready-made size that works. And I'll be honest with you, the star system, those stars go away when you arrive on campus. But that's something that NFL scouts look at and say, okay, this guy had talent. You look back in a couple of years ago, and maybe didn't have the production, but there's some talent in there that they can mine out of that, and that's something that they go to, because we've seen guys that have not had productive careers, 5-star prospects that have not had productive careers in college, that go on to play in the NFL for a long time because those scouts think, or those coaches think, that talent takes a while to degrade.
We're talking about a guy who's 21 years old. NFL guys, you're trying to forecast for the into their mid 20s when you're drafting guys. I think, Sean, when I kind of look at it, could go one way or the other. Right now, going into Indianapolis, I think Brandon Smith is the guy out of Penn State that gets drafted higher than where Penn State fans think he will go. last time it was Odafe Owe. I think a lot of people thought they looked at the sack number and they just thought, no way is he going to go in the first round, even though Sean and Tyler keep telling us he might, and he did. If it's not Brandon Smith, though, curious about Jesse Luketa, because he did really well for himself at the Senior Bowl. No surprise, he's going to crush some interviews out there, and you heard him on our podcast. He handles himself with tremendous poise. Where's the position fit? Is there going to be enough franchises that say we're willing to sink our teeth into this kid as a definitive defensive end or as a definitive linebacker? Because I don't think unless there's enough of those teams, then you risk him slipping, because you don't want to take a guy who's kind of sort of this and kind of sort of that. You only have so many roster spots. You only have so many of these draft picks. And I think Jesse Luketa isn't the kind of next level athlete that is going to warrant kind of that consideration. So to me, the more important thing is having somebody fall in love with him for a specific role, even if initially it's maybe, kind of a supplemental part of your defense, and then you go from there.
Couple things. You said no surprises, and I think that's the thing with Jesse. When you draft him, you know what you're getting. You have a very good idea of what he brings to the table at even if you don't have a clear-cut position for him, the value that he's going to add to your roster when he does that. Now, the other thing is, and the 40 coming out of the combine, always drastically overrated, but it's going to be very important for Jesse. This is a guy that came into campus running in the 4.9s. And, I think you posted the other day, one of his trainers or somebody, they did a mock combine and he was in the 4.6s. So if he can post anywhere close to that, probably set an over under about a 4.7, then, that he should be all right. But I think it's going to be very important to see how he runs in front of these scouts and how he moves in those position drills, just to figure out just a little bit more data on him to figure out what kind of athlete he is and if he's an NFL caliber athlete.
Talk about data. There's a lot of it on Tariq Castro-Fields, but he's a hard guy to figure out. For someone who played 50 games in an Nittany Lions uniform, the availability was an issue for him for much of the stretch. You look back at that 2019 season before the injury and before the wheels kind of came off for him, he was playing outstanding football. You were starting to project him as a top tier kind of prospect, and never was able to reach that level. He wasn't a first, second team All Big Ten performer here at Penn State, Sean. But, he's the kind of guy that I could see going out there, generating some interest and a competitive personality. And I don't know, I think he is the kind of player that special teams is a necessary pathway. It wasn't really something that we were focused on with him at Penn State. But when you say, how can he make the leap? How can he stick to a roster? You start thinking beyond the cornerback position. And to me, if he can show that kind of range, he could carve out a career for himself. Again, blue chip prospect coming in, played a ton of football in the Big Ten, and probably a guy that Penn State fans were able to pick on more than you're going to realize. The external view is on Tariq Castro-Fields. I think there's probably a little bit more of a cloud over him here than there is if you kind of just zoom out that lens and don't look at it from the Penn State standpoint.
Yeah, sometimes we see too much of these guys, and that's we tend to overrate some guys, underrate some others. I think Castro-Fields probably in that latter group. I think he can play in the pros. Can he stick? It's hard to say. It doesn't have the ball skills that Amani had a couple of years ago. And of course, Amani's having a great career in Detroit right now. But the funny thing that I keep going back to, if you look at his strengths on NFL.com, the first thing it says, big, long, and can run. I mean, that's what it comes down to for a lot of these guys. When you're, taking a 6'1" guy versus a 5'11" guy, is you tend to side with the bigger guy if they're similar speed or something like that. So he's big, he's long, he can run. He's got an opportunity here to, I don't want to say improve upon his tape, but show some things that there were holes in his game from viewing the tape that they're going to need answered, especially his health situation. I mean, you talk about how many games he played, but a lot of those are distant memories. He did not play, down the stretch at all last year. He did not play in the Outback Bowl, even though, he did the same thing where he would show up and sometimes go through warmups and just kind of be there for the Outback Bowl. Not that I think that dings him at all, but he's going to have questions about his health and how he can hold up at, especially at that level.
Yeah, unfortunately, although a lot of games accrued, not significant stretches where he's consistently available for you, and that's going to impact your perception of a player. And Sean,
or dominant stretches. That's the thing. Like he never looked at him and said that this guy was a shutdown corner. And
right.
Although I thought he was a very good corner, you never really saw that from him taking it upon himself, getting the turnover numbers and things like that.
Now, Sean, no one is as puzzling as Rasheed Walker is in terms of Penn State prospects in this draft. You know what, Brandon Smith maybe, to be honest with you, but Rasheed Walker, considering where the forecast was this time last year, felt like Penn State picked up a bonus year with Rasheed Walker, a guy who maybe was going to make that plunge into the 2021 NFL draft. And I mean, he made it very clear. The mission statement was to help Penn State win a Big Ten championship, but also to refine and fix the little this and that's about his game that maybe had him as a mid-round pick last year that could put him into first-round territory. Those early mock drafts forecasted him in that kind of a range. We brought up the name Donovan Smith a bit here in the comparison of the transition out to Penn State into the NFL. Obviously, an outcome like that would be extremely desirable. Donovan Smith is a Super Bowl champion and a very rich man who didn't finish his Penn State career on a high note. Rasheed Walker, time will tell, but talk about a guy that could go round 3 and I wouldn't be necessarily shocked. And if he goes round 7 or goes undrafted, I kind of get it too. I don't know where he is right now. And we're going to try to see if he's active in all these drills. But last time you and I saw him, he was working his way around Tampa on crutches.
Yeah, he was hurt there at the end of the season, so that's not a surprise if he wouldn't go through all these testing and things like that. I mean, you always want to be as healthy as possible, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if he was the 4th guy off the board. And I know that's another polarizing guy, especially for Penn State fans coming down the stretch and things like that last year. But he's just so talented. He's got the size and everything. I think he said he talked to the Packers, the Seahawks, and the Steelers for formal interviews when he was interviewed today. So there's certainly some buzz about him, and that tackle position is always one that you're looking for guys, especially in those middle rounds. If you can cultivate a starter out of the middle rounds and maybe turn him into something, you put your franchise in a very enviable position, especially at left tackle where he's expected to play. So I think he's talented. I don't think we saw the best of Rasheed Walker. I think that's a disappointment there. But I think that it's going to be another one of those guys like Brandon Smith that you're going to see him, you're going to be impressed by him if you're a scout, and you're going to think this is what we can do with him, especially at a position like that. So I would not be surprised if he was the 4th Penn State guy off the board. And I know that's probably, not a popular opinion after watching him over the past couple of seasons, but football people just think he's so talented. And so we'll see what happens with him. I'm very intrigued to see what happens. Maybe not this week, but at pro day to see if he works out and see if he's in great shape and see if he can go, because it's certainly that punch is going to be something that people talk about.
Yeah, I mentioned a range of round 3 to round 7. I want to make it clear I would veer more toward the early rounds than the late rounds in that case with Rasheed Walker, because I do, like you said, think there is such a high value placed on that position. It's a premium spot, and you can view Rasheed Walker. You can poke holes in that game, but there's a lot of film to study from him going up against future NFL edge rushers and current NFL edge rushers that you can scrutinize and work through and kind of talk with him through this draft process. And with the kind of volume he has, kind of the war chest he developed here at Penn State, I think he's going to get an opportunity. And just really curious, because this is a guy that we saw Donovan Smith go out and get that 2nd contract and now a 3rd contract. That's the key for Rasheed Walker, because the big payday that we thought maybe would be coming for him isn't necessarily going to be coming in this first year. And it's a big payday compared to most of us, but in NFL schemes, he's going to be targeting year 3, year 4. And does he have that potential to be a guy that you pick mid-round and then later on you're franchising him? He absolutely does. But just as we talked about in 2019, he had the potential to be an All-American. This year, he was a 3rd-team All-Big Ten pick.
Yeah, his best case scenario has always been that high ceiling. Like you look at every time you look at him, and he hasn't gotten there. It's unfortunate he hasn't gotten there. I thought he played well as a redshirt freshman in that situation, and then you didn't see the improvement that you would hope for from a Penn State perspective. But everybody has always talked about that ceiling, and that's what this draft is about. And yeah, we'll see where he's at come April. Again, what's this tackle class look like? I don't know, but it's never deep enough. It's never as deep as you want it to be. So I think that's a spot that certainly will come off the board quicker than other places around it.
Yeah, he's number 15 on Pro Football Focus's board. That's a lot different than being number 15 on the running back big board in terms of where you're going to go round by round. Sean, the last name to get to, specialist extraordinaire, Jordan Stout, an excellent chance to be the first specialist off the board here. We know what he can do. We know the personality was awesome. And I just want to point out before you do, did not have a Virginia Tech scholarship on the table.
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting to watch this because Matt Ariaza, who won the Ray guy, who was incredible at San Diego State, you would think he would be the odds-on favorite to be the number one, but there's a lot of people that have Stout as number one. Just I think he's a little bit more consistent, a little bit more controlling of where that ball goes. Ariaza was great at kicking the ball very far, and he's getting those 80-yard punts or whatever, but Stout, brings a lot to the table. And I'm curious to see which scouts are going to think that if he doesn't have to kick and he doesn't have to kick off or whatever, then he can focus all his energy on punting, and how good can he be as a punter. Plus, you've got Joe Lorig has great things to say about him. The guys that have been around. Blake Gillikin, of course, is a starter in the NFL right now, so that helps his cause as well. So you like Jordan Stout's prospects. I want to see what he runs because he ran that 4.47 or whatever last year. Hopefully there's no fakes or anything like that in the combine drills, but he can get past that and maybe work on that in pro day. But I'm excited to see where Stout lands. It's been fun to cover him. It's been fun to figure out that portal situation because he was kind of the first successful dive in there for Penn State. So excited to see where he lands, excited to see how he tests and where he comes out of this thing, because that's the thing about these draft boards is a lot of these positions will move all over the place, but for punters, there's only a handful of guys. So he's got to establish himself as the number one guy.
Yeah, an exceptional athlete, especially at the specialist room, and a guy who was a superstar high school soccer player as well, which you do hear from time to time with some of these kickers. I have to imagine, although as we saw, there were inconsistencies there, his ability to be a guy that you could turn to and hit a long distance field goal, or try a long distance field goal, or turn to in a kickoff situation. Because if you go down a specialist, if a guy pulls his hamstring in the first quarter, it can get ugly fast for you. So it's not necessarily something that's, I think, going to make or break him in the draft, but maybe when you're stacking up a couple names here and there and you kind of look at the laundry list of what he may be able to do for your roster and some of the flexibility he could provide for you, if something were to happen in game, can't hurt him. Certainly what was he, one of four guys who were handling all three full-time specialist jobs until the last couple games of the season when Jake Pinniger stepped up as the place kicker again. So 8 guys. Continue to follow Lions247.com throughout the weekend for updates from Indianapolis.
Can I put you on the spot? Who do you think's got the most to gain? Who do you think's got the most to lose in the next couple of days?
I think most to gain. I'm going to go with Jesse Luketa. I think if he can come out of this thing with some rave reviews for what he's doing as an edge rusher, as a defensive end, because again, I think based on what we've seen from him, to me, that is the spot where the ceiling is higher, and I think where he could really take off and continue to focus there. Again, if he can get a few people to really buy into what he can be there, because there's not a ton of evidence at this level, I think you could see him end up going a lot higher than any of us really could have imagined, especially before the 2021 season. And then I would say, in terms of most to lose, I guess I will go with Rasheed Walker in this situation, only because I don't know where he is from a health standpoint. Some of these other guys might be nicked up or recovering. I don't know. But I think Rasheed Walker finished that trajectory is pointing really high at one point at Penn State. And by the time it got to the end, we just talked about it. We covered it. It wasn't pointing in the same direction. And I'm curious how he's carried over the last couple months, physically, mentally. What's he going to impress upon these scouts when he sits down across from them? I think there's just a lot to answer in terms of Rasheed Walker. And to me, he's the guy that when I go through this list and think about where they were coming out of high school, he felt like the guy that you could maybe most easily project toward a first-round NFL future. Brandon Smith was a little tricky from a positional standpoint, but I was thinking 18 years old to 21, 22, Rasheed Walker is the guy to me that I would have guessed out of this group would be the first-round pick.
Yeah, no, good picks. Good picks. I think there's arguments to be made for everybody there, but certainly when you take a look at draft position, Dotson dropping from 25 to 40 would be a big loss, but whereas Brandon Smith dropping from the 4th round to the 7th round would be, probably just as big, even though there's more slots in there. So just want to get your opinion on that. Just I think everybody's going to have a different answer. So
I think the key here is, can someone, a head coach, a defensive coordinator, a GM, convince themselves that Jaquan Brisker is a future quarterback for their defense? This is a guy that I think IQ through the roof. an extension of the coaching staff kind of presence. And I know that at the NFL, there's a lot of guys that kind of fit that mold, keeps them in the league for a long time. But to me, safety's a bit devalued, it would seem, and that's going to impact Jaquan Brisker perhaps in this draft. But this is a guy that really took it upon himself to enhance his draft stock. And boy, did he ever do that as a fifth-year player at the college level. I think he's going to have an opportunity to really kill it in some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. And if he goes out and lights it up as an athlete, there's some room there. Maybe he's a surprise early pick as well. He's just the guy that I feel like I'm a little surprised there's not more buzz about him right now than there actually is, because of the season he's coming off of at a position that, let's face it, I mean, Penn State's had really solid safety play. They haven't had safety play like that, at least I think in the Franklin era.
Yeah, it would be nice to have a Penn State guy go in the first round, a Penn State secondary guy go in the first round.
Right.
They've been playing pretty solid ball the last couple of years. It'd be interesting to see Ebiketie at 6'2", 250, being projected in the first round. I'm curious if his athletic numbers, are what people want, if his length numbers, if his height numbers are what people want, because that's the one thing. If you're projecting a guy in the first round to come off the edge that's 6'2", we know he's a special talent. We saw him this year, and he was awesome for Penn State, and he was such a big part of, what they did last year, especially in the portal. But yeah, I think there's going to be questions about his size, and we'll see how that holds up, and does that drop him, a round or so? And going from the first round to the second round is obviously a big deal.
Well, another big board to look at, Sean, for the 2023 class. 247 Sports put out new rankings on Wednesday. That top 247 still features the same three Penn State commits. Alex Birchmeier at number 23 overall. He remains the number 1 interior offensive lineman. Javen Williams, number 8 offensive tackle, number 68 overall. And then Neo Avery, number 126 and number 12 among edge defenders. I think he's still technically listed as an athlete in 247 Sports, but number 12 among edge defenders. Sean, composite 4 stars remain Mega Barnwell, Lamont Payne, I should say. But very careful. So no major movement here. There was this and a lot of movement around them. These guys stayed pretty much in place, and obviously at the top of this thing, it's another indication that they are building a really strong offensive line class in the 2023 cycle.
Yeah, Birchmeier and Williams there at the top, certainly guys that you can build around, not only as an offensive line class, but a full class as well. I love Neo Avery, but yeah, no surprises there. I think the one guy that you look at when you go to this class and you say, does he make a dent as a 4-star prospect? Josh Miller. And I know guards are not usually as highly thought of as tackles, so you could get Donka's argument in there, but Josh Miller is a really good football player. I know that they've been Penn State's been actively, I don't want to say actively stumping, but they are very aware that they think that they rate him higher than we do at 247 Sports.
Birchmeier, by the way, just picked up his second consecutive state championship on the wrestling mat. Congratulations to him. Nice to have that in your pedigree. I know Brian Doan has mentioned that a few times, and one more time, Brian Doan's comparison there, Quentin Nelson. So that is a really, really outstanding all-pro, former All-American prospect on the offensive interior.
He'll go well with Pat Mahomes and Aaron Donald when he gets to campus.
Yes, quite the crew. This class is ranked 5th in the composite right now. They lead the Big Ten, 8 players on board. And now it's time for our 5-star mailbag. Sean, we'll wrap it up with this one. And it takes us back to some conversations looking ahead towards spring ball and beyond. You've mentioned Kalen King and Landon Tengwall as potential starters in year 2. Who else could make a meaningful step forward before next season from a pretty small 2021 class? And yes, it was a very small class that lost Nate Bruce early. There's not a ton of names to go through when you consider this question.
There's certainly not. And if you look at battling for starting positions, Jalen Reed's obviously one that you could turn to. He played quite a bit down the stretch last year at safety. Going to be battling with Keaton Ellis and, of course, Zakee Wheatley in that safety battle as well. He's another redshirt freshman that has turned some heads. But you go down the list. Kobe King, I think, will be in at Mike, battling with Tyler Elson once they figure that position out. And then a Harrison Wallace that we talked about. Can he break through as a receiver? Probably in a two deep manner, more so than a starter. But he's got the athleticism and the bounce to do so.
Sanders Sahadak. I mean, he's got to be part of the conversation here, I suppose. I mean, Jake Pinniger has been getting some love during winter workouts from new special teams coordinator, and he's the guy who's kicked plenty of balls for this Penn State squad. But Sahadak was considered the number one kicker coming out of the 2021 class. We talked about it. Jordan Stout's focused on the NFL these days, so that's an obvious one you got to go to. And we were mentioning Kalen King. How about his twin brother, Kobe King, right in the thick of it to start at middle linebacker? Some of the other names we've mentioned there, Tyler Elsdon in the box as well. But Kobe King, Kalen King, could you see these guys both step up as starters in year two? Certainly seems plausible. And then kind of outside of the starting conversation, but in the taking a step forward conversation, I'm tempted to look toward those wide receivers, Trey Wallace and Liam Clifford. We talked about Trey Wallace's jump out of the gym athleticism last week. I think it was. You shared a video from the basketball court recently. But to me, you've hit on some classes here with Taylor Stubblefield at wide receiver after a stretch where you didn't hit too well in any wide receiver classes. You just brought in another big one here in 2022. Curious what you're going to get in year two out of those two guys. Trey Wallace, I think, has been the guy who's generated more buzz, and certainly the athleticism stands out. Not really a need for these guys to jump through, crack the starting lineup. I would still favor Mitchell Tinsley. I would still favor Malik Mega in the conversation. But you want to hit on these guys, and we just haven't really had any kind of, evidence from our standpoint, whether it be on the practice field or in game day action, that they have what it takes to thrive and succeed at the Big Ten level and be meaningful playmakers for Penn State early in their careers. But I look at those two, Liam Clifford, Harrison Wallace, and I want to see what they can do with the spring practice ahead of them.
Yeah, that's a spot where you can hop people and take it and run with it. We've seen it in the past. We saw Parker Washington and Keandre Lambert-Smith do that. Another guy that I'll throw out there, Jordan Vandenberg, is you forget about him because of the circumstances regarding his arrival. But defensive tackle, there's a lot of bodies at defensive tackle. So you're talking about potential 3 deep that can play. When Mustipher gets back and gets healthy, when Beeman is back and is able, he's a very talented kid. And then you've got Izzard and Ellies there. Vandenberg, I think, could fit into that. We'll see if Zane Durant fits into that as well. But I think you're feeling pretty good about defensive tackle right now. And I think Vandenberg is a guy that you can throw out there and be confident that he can give you some quality reps.
Vandenberg, to me, is a guy that when we talk about this class a year from now, and again, without Nate Bruce, 15 players from that class who arrived last year, very small group. Wouldn't be surprised if a year from now we're saying Vandenberg is in the top half of that group in terms of impact on a football field for Penn State through the first couple of years of their careers. I think he's going to break through and be a rotational component for them, Sean. We'll find out a lot more through the spring ball, but Jordan Vandenberg, I think, came to campus, turn people's heads and continue to surprise them. And now to the point where there's a little bit of game tape on him. Great call mentioning him because he's all the way at the bottom of this list for the class when you go over to 247 Sports.
It's certainly easy to forget about him. As I said, the circumstances surrounding his arrival were different, much different than we're used to. But he came and played last year. He got that redshirt year, so he's going to have the ability to maybe make a dent in that rotation. And John Scott's going to have some options up there.
Good stuff out of the mailbag today. You can drop your question and 5-star rating and review up at Apple Podcasts. We'll get to it when we can. A few housekeeping notes here for the show. Penn State's going on spring break. That's our plan. We think, certainly for me, I'm heading out with the family for a week on vacation. Sean's home with the kids who are on spring break next week. And then we got Lance getting hitched next weekend. This is going to be a big week ahead for all of us, a little bit more so for Lance. Congratulations, buddy. But we plan on coming back to you definitely by the 15th of March. So that would be a couple Tuesdays from now. But if something big pops up and it's worth talking about, Sean, Lance, we'll get together and they'll talk about it next week. But don't count on it. We'll be back a week after that, but a little bit of a spring break for us. And then it's spring ball time, and we get to talk about a whole different set of conversations. And that's always a fun thing to turn the page after January and February. And Sean, big thanks to our listeners for surviving the big chunk of the offseason with us. We got on-campus recruiting coming back. We've got the official visits around the corner. And, of course, as I said, the pads are coming back on. So light at the end of the tunnel has suddenly expanded in a nice way, especially for the guys getting on a plane heading south, although with the baby for the first time.
Yeah, good luck with that. There'll be plenty to overreact about. Again, check out our stuff on Lions247.com after the lifting session today. We'll get to talk to Chuck Lowesley, get to see some of the guys that we haven't seen for a while. So looking forward to that. Check that out on the site. But until whenever we see you the next time, that'll be it. For Tyler Donohue, for our producer, Lance Glenn, I'm Sean Fitz. Thanks for joining us on the Lions247 podcast.